we take for granted being able to pick up our phones and instantly hear someone across the world, but like, have you ever stopped to think about how wild that really is?
It's pretty mind-blowing when you actually think about it. It really highlights how far we've come in terms of connecting with each other instantly across vast distances.
Right. And when we start to dig into it, the story behind the telephone, and of course, Alexander Graham Bell, the man often credited with its invention, is so much more interesting than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. It's a story full of surprising twists and turns, way more than just a lone inventor having a eureka moment.
Okay, so let's dive into this deep dive then. I have to admit, I always had this image of Bell as this solitary genius, tinkering away in his workshop. But the articles he sent over paint a much more, like, layered picture.
Yeah, Bell's fascination with sound, it wasn't just some random interest, it was practically ingrained in him from childhood.
Yeah, these articles go way back, like, into his family history and everything. Like, his dad wasn't just some, casual linguistics enthusiast, right?
Yeah. Not at all. His father, Alexander Melville Bell, was a well-known elocutionist and an inventor in his own right.
Okay, so elocutionist, meaning.
Basically, he was an expert in public speaking, how to use your voice effectively. Think, like diction, pronunciation, really focusing on that clarity of speech.
Oh.
He even created an entire system called visible speech.
Visible speech. Okay, now that sounds pretty interesting. Was it like a precursor to emojis, but for sounds?
Haha, I guess you could say that. It was a system of written symbols that represented all the different sounds we make when we speak. It was actually revolutionary at the time.
So instead of writing down words, you would use these symbols to actually show the sounds. That's pretty incredible. But why was that such a big deal back then?
Well, the main goal of visible speech was to help deaf individuals learn to speak. It allowed them to visually see the sounds they were making, which made it easier for them to understand and reproduce.
Wow, I had no idea. That adds a whole other dimension to Bell's story then. This wasn't just some guy trying to invent some cool new gadget. It sounds like there was this deeper, more personal desire to break down communication barriers that was basically rooted in his family history.
Exactly. And this passion for communication definitely rubbed off on young Alexander Graham Bell. He followed directly in his father's footsteps and became a teacher of the deaf himself.
That makes you wonder if maybe it was those experiences working directly with people who couldn't hear that really fueled his desire to find new ways for people to communicate.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that one of his students was Mabel Hubbard, who later became his wife.
And she was deaf as well, right?
Yes, from a very young age. So this drive to bridge that communication gap wasn't just a professional endeavor for Bell, it was deeply personal. It really is a fascinating look at how our backgrounds shape our passions.
It really is. Okay, so we've got Bell, and he's got this deep understanding of sound, this like drive to improve communication. But how does that actually lead to the invention of the telephone?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. See, Bell wasn't actually setting out to invent the telephone, at least not initially. His original goal was to improve the telegraph.
Right, okay, just to refresh my memory, what exactly was the telegraph again?
So the telegraph was the main way people communicated over long distances at the time. Basically, it allowed people to send messages over wires using Morse code.
Oh, right, dots and dashes. Way faster than sending a letter, but not exactly instant messaging.
Exactly. So Bell was really focused on trying to send multiple telegraph messages across the same wire at the same time. He was looking to improve efficiency, not necessarily invent a whole new device.
But then somewhere along the way, the human voice kind of like entered the picture.
You could say that. Bell, with his background in sound and his goal of connecting people, he started to believe that maybe, just maybe, it might be possible to transmit actual spoken words over wires.
I mean, that must have sounded totally bonkers at the time.
Can you imagine pitching that idea back then? Hey, I can make your voice travel through wires. People probably would have thought he'd lost it.
But I guess that's what makes this such a great story. It wasn't just this straight line from, like, idea to invention. It was a total leap into the unknown.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Bell wasn't the only one with this seemingly impossible dream.
Oh, no, wait, don't tell me. Is there a rival inventor about to enter the scene?
There is. Enter Elisha Gray, another inventor who was also working on a device that could transmit sound over wires. And get this, both Bell and Gray raced to the patent office on the very same day, February 14th, 1876, to file patents for their versions of the telephone.
Wow, Valentine's Day, no less. Talk about some high
Oh,
stakes.
absolutely. It's one of the most famous patent races in history.
Hmm.
And we're talking just hours separating their submissions.
Hours? You're kidding. So who won?
Drum roll, please.
Yeah.
The patent, and with it the official title of inventor of the telephone, was granted to Alexander Graham Bell.
I bet Elisha Gray was thrilled about that.
You can imagine the frustration. To come so close, to be working independently on such a groundbreaking invention, only to be edged out by a matter of hours. It's heartbreaking, really. But, and this is important, the controversy didn't end there.
It really makes you wonder, like what actually constitutes an invention? Is it just this one single brilliant aha moment? Or is it more like a bunch of steps, maybe even with a bunch of different people working towards the same goal?
That's the debate that still surrounds Bell and Gray to this day, right? It's like some people argue that Gray's contributions got totally overshadowed, while others are like, nope, Bell's patent was totally legit. It's one of those things that probably won't ever really be settled, you know?
It's true what they say then. History is rarely neat and tidy, huh? But okay, so all this patent drama aside, there had to be a moment when all those theories and legal battles actually led to a real working telephone.
Oh, absolutely. And that moment was March 10th, 1876. Bell was back in his lab in Boston, and he finally had a working model that was ready to be tested.
Okay, I gotta know, what momentous message did Bell choose to send across the airwaves for the very first time? Did he quote Shakespeare? Maybe recite some poetry?
Not quite. I think in a moment of, like, pure practical excitement, he just called out to his assistant, Thomas Watson, who was in another room.
Okay, so what were Bell's history-making first words ever spoken into a telephone?
He said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you."
Hmm, that's it. Hmm. Not the most poetic turn of phrase, but I guess when you're testing out a technological breakthrough functionality over flair, right?
Exactly. It wasn't about crafting the perfect soundbite for the history books. This was about seeing if it actually worked. And it did. Watson heard Bell's voice through the receiver, crystal clear, and, well, I imagine he came running to confirm what he'd just heard. It was a success.
The dawn of a new age of communication. Although those early telephones, from what I've read, they were still a little rough around the edges.
Oh, yeah, totally. Could you imagine, like, liquid transmitters? Messy and super delicate. It's kind of amazing they worked at all. But that's the thing about innovation. It doesn't just stop. It keeps going, pushing forward. And the race was on to turn the telephone from this fragile experiment into a reliable everyday tool.
And wasn't that where Thomas Edison, Bell's biggest rival, re-enters the picture?
He does indeed. Edison, he saw the potential of the telephone, but he also knew it needed some serious work. His big contribution, the carbon microphone.
The carbon microphone, what was so special about that?
Well, see, those early Bell telephones, they had this issue with really weak sound transmission. It made it pretty difficult to hear, I imagine. Conversations involved a lot of straining and repeating. Anyway, Edison's carbon microphone, it basically amplified that electrical signal produced by the voice, which dramatically improved both the sound quality and the volume.
So, next time we're chatting on the phone, we can thank Edison that we're not all straining to hear each other whispering through like a tin can and a string. But it's funny, isn't it? Bell and Edison, these huge rivals, they kind of ended up collaborating, even if it was unintentional, on shaping the future of the telephone.
It just goes to show sometimes competition and collaboration, they go hand in hand, especially when it comes to innovation. But it's important to remember the impact of the telephone. It went way beyond just making phone calls clearer. It fundamentally changed the way we interact as human beings, how we do business, even just how we experience the world.
It really is mind-blowing when you think about it. The telephone shrunk the world long before the internet, right? Suddenly people across continents could talk in real time, rural communities weren't so isolated from urban centers. Heck, it even changed the way we fight wars and run businesses.
And think about it. What started as a way to help deaf people communicate ended up completely revolutionizing communication for everyone.
From visible speech to those first crackling words over a wire to those smartphones we all have in our pockets today, it's been an incredible journey. It really makes you wonder, though, what innovations are happening right now that might seem totally ordinary but are going to fundamentally reshape the world as we know it? It really makes you think.